In the last two sessions, we looked at the historical evidence for the death of Jesus on a cross and the empty tomb. We said the cross produced a dead body and the tomb contained no body. Now it's time to turn to the evidence for Jesus appearing to individuals and groups after his death. In other words, the people saw somebody. I want to introduce you to one of the earliest Christian oral traditions that every Christian needs to know about. In 1 Corinthians 15, 3-7, Paul recounts what biblical scholars recognize as an early Christian creed dating to within a few years of the crucifixion. For I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the Scriptures, that he was buried, and that he was raised on the third day in accordance with the Scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas, then to the 12, then he appeared to more than 500 brothers at one time, most of whom are still alive, though some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles. Last of all, as to one untimely born, he appeared also to me. Now, the first thing I want you to note is that this creed is early, like really early. Atheist scholar Gerd Ludemann says, the elements in this tradition are to be dated to the first 2 years after the crucifixion of Jesus, not later than 3 years. This is important because it demonstrates that the appearances of Jesus after his death are not late legendary developments. There simply was not enough time for a late concocted story. Second, this creed affirms the same Jesus that was buried was also raised. Now, this is a significant point since some want to turn the appearances into something non-physical, but that won't work. When Paul speaks about the appearances, he's talking about an embodied person, not a disembodied spirit. Luke, Paul's traveling companion, describes the physical bodily resurrection of Jesus. When the resurrected Jesus appeared to the disciples, he says, "Why are you troubled? And why do doubts arise in your heart? See my hands and my feet, that it is I myself. Touch me and see, for a spirit does not have flesh and bones, as you see that I have." And when he had said this, he showed them his hands and his feet. Here, Jesus explicitly points out that his resurrected body is not an immaterial spirit. First, he tells them it is I myself. He is belaboring the point that it is Jesus standing before them. It is not a spiritual version of Jesus. It's the same Jesus that walked, talked, and ate with them throughout his ministry. Second, he tells them that his resurrected body is made of flesh and bones, not just made to look like it's flesh and bones. And Jesus then provides two evidences to his disciples. The first evidence is that he presents his hands and his feet to be properly examined. He tells them to touch and see. Now, is there a reason why Jesus shows them his hands and his feet? The answer is yes. Jesus is showing the disciples the very scars his resurrected body retained after the crucifixion. The second evidence is in the following two verses. Luke writes, "And while they were still disbelieving for joy and were marveling, he said to them, 'Have you anything here to eat?' They gave him a piece of broiled fish, and he took it and ate it before them." Now, did you catch that? Jesus demonstrates his body is made of flesh and bones by eating a flesh and bones fish right in front of them. This seemingly trivial detail about Jesus eating lunch is incredibly significant to the question of the nature of Jesus' body. What more could Jesus do to display that this is the same physical body that left the empty tomb? Going back to the creed, Paul reports that Jesus appeared to the disciples, including groups of disciples. He appeared to the chief disciple Peter, to the inner circle of the disciples known as the 12, and he appeared to a group of 500 disciples at once. Even more amazing, he appeared to two non-disciples, one a skeptic and the other an enemy. I want to look specifically at these two very briefly. First, consider the skeptic James. During the life and ministry of Jesus, his brothers, including James, didn't believe. However, something happened. James goes from being a skeptic to being called one of the three pillars of the church in Jerusalem, being head of the Jerusalem church and council of elders, and being willing to die for his faith. What happened to cause this change? What explains this transformation? Well, the creed says, then he appeared to James. What about Paul? Well, at one point, Paul was called Saul of Tarsus. He was a rabbi, a Pharisee, a respected Jewish leader. He participated in the execution of Christians, and he violently persecuted the church of God and tried to destroy it. However, something happened. Paul goes from persecuting Christians to being numbered with them. What happened to cause this change? What explains this transformation? Paul adds to the creed, "He appeared to me also." Both James and Paul were willing to give their lives for their commitment to the gospel. And we have reason to believe that that's actually what happened. Josephus tells us that James was stoned to death illegally by the Sanhedrin, and the early church tradition teaches that Paul was beheaded in Rome under Nero. Interestingly, most scholars agree that disciples, as well as James and Paul, experienced appearances. But as we'll see in the next session, many try to explain those appearances without appealing to the bodily resurrection. In the last 3 sessions, we've explored 3 lines of evidence. First, the cross produced a dead body. Second, the tomb contained no body. And third, the people saw and touched somebody. That's some of the evidence. Those are the historical facts. But we're not done. The question remains, what best explains those 3 facts? In the next session, we're going to look at some of the explanations put forward and why the resurrection of Jesus comes out on top.